He was just my husband's colleague. Until that day at the office changed everything. Don't forget to like this story, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. I never imagined that a quiet, ordinary evening, just me, a cup of jasmine tea, and the soft ticking of the kitchen clock, could become the start of something that would unravel everything I thought I knew. But that's the nature of change, isn't it? It never knocks. It doesn't warn. It just arrives, cloaked in the mundane, and leaves nothing the same. It was late autumn. The sun had dipped below the horizon early, casting a golden glow that slowly gave way to the shadows of evening. Outside, the wind played with the amber leaves, sending them dancing across our front porch in swirling patterns. Inside, I sat at our kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm mug, breathing in the familiar scent of steeped tea. It was my favorite part of the day, that moment of pause before David returned from work. A moment of stillness. Of predictability. My name is Rachel. I'm 48. David and I have been married nearly 25 years, a lifetime to some. Our marriage has always been steady, grounded in loyalty and mutual respect. We've built a life together, raised children, survived losses, celebrated wins, and found a rhythm in the ordinary. Our love isn't fiery or impulsive. It's a quiet sort of love, the kind that settles into your bones and becomes part of your breathing. We have traditions, too. Saturday morning pancakes. Sunday afternoon walks in the park. Laughing at the same inside jokes we've recycled for over a decade. Birthdays that never miss a handwritten card. A kiss before bed, even if we're exhausted or annoyed. Ours is a good marriage. Not perfect, but good. David works long hours as a senior manager at a respected firm downtown. He's dedicated, thoughtful, and often tired. When he comes home, he usually brings pieces of his day with him. Bits of office drama, client negotiations, budget woes, or updates on projects. I always listen, or at least pretend to. I know the names of his colleagues, but they've always felt like background noise, people who exist only in his world, not mine. That night was no different. Or at least it didn't start that way. I had no reason to expect that one offhand comment from David, a simple, casual story over dinner, would become the thread that began to unravel everything. But sometimes, life doesn't announce its turning points. It whispers them into the familiar. And in that whisper, everything began to shift. You wouldn't believe the day I had, David sighed, his voice heavy with the kind of exhaustion that came not just from work, but from the emotional weight of something memorable. He loosened his tie, dropped it on the back of the chair, and finally settled into his seat across from me at the dinner table. The clink of cutlery and the soft hum of the overhead light created the kind of quiet intimacy we had grown used to over the years. Ethan pulled off something incredible today, he continued, shaking his head with disbelief. The whole office is still talking about it. I looked up from my plate, my curiosity stirred. Ethan? David chuckled lightly, reaching for the water pitcher. Yeah, Ethan. I've mentioned him before. Early 40s, came on board maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Bright guy. One of the smartest in the department. Kind of a rising star. I nodded slowly, trying to place a face to the name. The truth was, I had heard the name before, Ethan, sprinkled casually in David's workplace anecdotes, always just a passing mention in stories I half listened to while folding laundry or scrolling through emails. A colleague, nothing more. A name among many. David leaned back, the admiration in his voice unmistakable. He stood up to the regional director today. Right in the middle of a big meeting. Told him flat out that the restructuring plan was flawed. And the crazy part? He had the data to back it up. Not just opinions, hard facts. He saved the entire department from what could have been a disaster. I blinked, impressed despite myself. That's bold. David gave a small laugh. It was more than bold. It was fearless. No one else had the guts to say anything. And the way he did it, calm, respectful, but firm. He didn't just challenge authority, he commanded the room. I have to say, I respect the guy even more now. That moment lingered longer than I expected. David had praised others before, sure, but there was something different in the way he spoke about Ethan. Not just professional admiration, but something deeper. A recognition. A spark. And for the first time, I really noticed the name. Ethan. No longer just a supporting character in David's office tales. He had substance now, weight, shape, intrigue. He wasn't just a colleague anymore. He was a presence. A man who stood out. A man I suddenly found myself imagining. And that realization unsettled me more than I cared to admit. A week after that conversation at dinner, David and I found ourselves stepping into a world of polished marble floors, crystalline chandeliers, and conversations that hovered between corporate charm and cautious networking. It was the annual company gala, a formal evening meant to celebrate another fiscal year, dressed in tuxedos, high heels, and champagne toasts. I had slipped into a deep blue dress for the occasion, elegant but not overly showy, soft satin that shimmered under the light. It was one of those rare evenings where I paid extra attention to my reflection, curling my hair just so, applying a richer shade of lipstick, even dabbing on the perfume I saved for special occasions. I told myself it was for David. For the event. But a small voice in the back of my mind wondered if it was for something else entirely. The ballroom was alive, buzzing with the cadence of clinking glasses, the scent of floral arrangements and designer colognes filling the air. We exchanged greetings with David's co-workers, small talk passing like gentle waves, harmless, fleeting. And then, just as I reached for another flute of sparkling wine, I heard David's voice. "Rachel, meet Ethan," he said with a warmth that immediately drew my attention. "Ethan, this is my wife." I turned, and there he was. Ethan. The man I had only known in fragments, through my husband's stories and quiet admiration, was now standing in front of me in the flesh. Tall, poised, dark-haired, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that looked effortlessly refined. But it wasn't his appearance that caught me off guard. It was the stillness in his gaze, the way his eyes met mine and held them, like they saw something worth pausing for. "Pleasure to finally meet you, Rachel," he said, extending his hand. His voice was smooth, confident, carrying a quiet authority that made the rest of the room fade for just a moment. "The pleasure's mine," I replied, hoping the tremble in my chest didn't reach my voice. Our hands touched, and the contact lingered, a second too long, a degree too warm. There was a charge in the air. Subtle, but unmistakable. Throughout the night, I found myself gravitating toward where Ethan stood. It wasn't intentional, or at least, that's what I told myself. But whenever he was nearby, the room felt more vibrant. His words weren't flashy, but thoughtful. He asked questions no one else bothered to ask, and listened, truly listened, to the answers. Later, when David was pulled away, Ethan leaned in with a conspiratorial smile. "You don't seem like someone who enjoys these events." I laughed, caught in his gaze. "That obvious?" He tilted his head. "Only to someone who's paying attention." And I realized then, he was. 3 days later, life offered one of its casual little coincidences, one that felt anything but casual. David had left a crucial file at home, and since I wasn't doing much that morning, I offered to bring it to him. It wasn't a grand gesture, just one of the many small, unnoticed things we do in long marriages. Acts of love that fade into habit. I drove downtown, took the elevator to the 23rd floor, and stepped into the busy pulse of David's office. The space buzzed with the rhythm of a typical workday, keyboards clacked in unison, phones chirped from every corner, and voices floated down glass-walled corridors like trailing echoes. I smiled at the receptionist, past familiar faces I only vaguely remembered from company events, and finally handed the folder to David's assistant. I turned to leave, mission accomplished. "Rachel?" I stopped mid-step. There he was. Ethan. He stood just outside the break room, sleeves rolled up, leaning casually against the doorframe like a scene pulled from a movie. His eyes caught mine, and in them was a flicker of surprise, followed quickly by something warmer. Something more knowing. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, voice lower than I remembered, carrying that steady calm that made even mundane words feel intentional. I smiled politely, trying to steady the thump in my chest. "Just dropping something off for David." He nodded, stepping forward slightly. "Got a minute?" I was just about to grab some coffee. I should have said no. I told myself to keep it light, brief. But I didn't. Some part of me, small but persistent, wanted to say yes. So I did. He poured 2 cups and offered one to me. We stepped away from the crowded spaces and down a quieter hallway lined with windows. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside, the silence between us felt louder than anything. "I meant what I said at the gala," he said, his gaze holding mine. I tilted my head. "About what?" "About David. And about you," he said, voice soft but unwavering. "You don't seem like someone who's been truly seen in a long time." His words landed in my chest like a hush after a storm. I stared into my coffee cup, the steam rising between us. "That's a bold thing to say," I murmured. "Is it?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "David and we've been together for 25 years. Of course he sees me." Ethan's eyes didn't flinch. "I don't mean the way you're supposed to be seen. I mean the woman you are now. Not the role you play. Not the past version. You." And in that quiet hallway, something inside me cracked open. That night, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Dinner was its usual quiet affair: grilled salmon, steamed vegetables, a glass of red wine. David talked about an upcoming client presentation, pausing now and then to glance at his phone. I responded with nods, murmured encouragement, and half smiles, but my mind was far away, back in that hallway, with a cup of coffee in my hands and a sentence echoing in my head like a slow-burning ember. "You don't seem like someone who's been truly seen." The words had followed me home. They crept into my thoughts as I washed the dishes, folded laundry, and prepared for bed. They whispered to me as I smoothed the sheets and turned off the lights. I lay in bed beside David, listening to the comforting, familiar rhythm of his breathing. He had fallen asleep quickly, as he often did after long days, one arm folded under his pillow, the other resting near mine but not quite touching. We had our bedtime routine, like everything else in our life. A kiss on the cheek. A shared good night. But that night, even our good night had felt like a habit, a reflex, rather than a moment. I stared up at the ceiling, the shadows casting gentle patterns on the plaster above. My eyes followed them, hoping they'd lull me into sleep. But instead, they stirred questions I hadn't dared ask in years. When was the last time I felt truly alive? When was the last time someone looked at me, not as a wife, a partner, or a helper, but as a woman with dreams, longings, and a soul that still wanted to be touched, seen, known? It wasn't about Ethan. At least, not entirely. It was about what he'd noticed. About the truth he'd spoken aloud that I hadn't even admitted to myself. It was unsettling, like holding a mirror up to a life I thought I had understood. David stirred beside me. "You awake?" He mumbled, half asleep. "Yeah," I whispered. "What's wrong?" "Just thinking." He made a soft sound of acknowledgement, then drifted back to sleep. And I lay there, wide-eyed, still, aching with the weight of the words I couldn't unhear. That night, the quiet didn't soothe me. It haunted me. Because in the silence, I realized something had shifted. Something deep, subtle, and irreversible. And no matter how tightly I clung to my familiar world, I knew, nothing was going to be the same again. 3 days after that sleepless night, I found myself wandering the city with no destination in mind. David had texted me that morning, "Late meeting again. Don't wait up." I'd stared at his message longer than necessary, a familiar dullness settling over me. It wasn't new. It wasn't malicious. It was just expected. Another piece of a life lived on autopilot. Instead of going home, I ended up at the little cafe near David's office, the one with the hanging lights and the smell of cinnamon and roasted beans that always reminded me of late autumn. It was quiet inside, the lunch rush long gone. I slipped into a corner booth, the one by the window, and ordered chamomile tea. The server smiled. I nodded without looking up. I wasn't even sure why I was there. Maybe I just wanted to sit somewhere that didn't feel like mine. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere I could think without the hum of laundry machines or the echo of silence in my kitchen. I had barely taken my first sip when I heard a voice that made my heart jump. "Rachel?" I looked up, and there he was. Ethan. His expression shifted from surprise to something warmer, gentler, even, as he walked toward me with the takeaway coffee in hand. His coat was slung casually over his arm, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up just enough to feel like he belonged more to the world outside than the corporate one within. "What are the odds?" he said, a small smile playing on his lips. I returned it, hesitantly. Fate, or caffeine dependency. He chuckled and motioned to the empty seat across from me. Mind if I join? I hesitated for a beat too long. Then, sure. He sat down, setting his coffee between us. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence wasn't awkward, it was aware. Alive with questions neither of us wanted to ask first. Finally, he broke it. How have you been? I stirred my tea, staring at the gentle swirl. Busy. The usual. He tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing just a bit. And how are you really? That question unseated me. Not because it was invasive, but because it felt prepared, as if he knew I'd been waiting for someone to ask it. I looked up and met his eyes. Something in me softened, gave way. I've been thinking about what you said. At the office. He didn't look surprised. He looked ready. And just like that, the cafe around us faded. There was only the quiet between our breaths, and the truth that was finally beginning to surface. That evening, I didn't go straight home. I took the long way instead, driving past the grocery store we used to visit every Friday night, past the little park where we took our kids when they were small, past the movie theater where David and I had our third date. Everything looked the same. But I didn't feel the same. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house was quiet. The porch light was on, casting a soft amber glow onto the front steps. It used to make me feel safe. Tonight, it felt like a spotlight on a truth that I was no longer able to bury. Inside, David was already setting the table. He smiled when he saw me, the same tired smile I'd seen 1,000 times before. Hey, you're just in time, he said. I made pasta. I nodded, hanging up my coat. Smells good. We ate in near silence, the occasional clink of fork against plate filling the space where conversation used to live. He talked about a new hire at the office, about a glitch in the client system. I nodded, offered short replies, but my mind was far away, still sitting in that booth with Ethan, hearing the question echo over and over, how are you really? After dinner, I cleared the plates and wiped the counters. David scrolled through his emails at the table. I turned to him, drying my hands on a towel. David. He looked up. Yeah? I took a slow breath, steadying my voice. Can I ask you something? Personal? He frowned slightly, lowering his phone. Of course. What is it? I hesitated. The words were heavy, like stones on my tongue. Are you happy? David blinked. What do you mean? I mean, are you happy with us? With our life? He leaned back, caught off guard. Where's this coming from? I shrugged, unsure myself. I feel like we're living next to each other, not with each other. His jaw tightened, his brows knitting in thought. For a moment, I thought he might dismiss it, laugh it off, or worse, be angry. But then, quietly, he said, I guess I thought this is what happens. You build a life, a routine. You stop chasing after the new because you already found what matters. I swallowed hard. But do you think that's enough? He looked at me, really looked. And in that moment, something softened between us. Not a resolution. But the first breath of honesty in a very long time. No, he said. I don't think it is. Not anymore. That night, after the conversation with David, I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, a mug of cooling tea in my hands and the distant hum of the dishwasher filling the silence. The house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that comes after something is said that can't be unsaid. Not explosive. Not destructive. Just exposed. I kept replaying our conversation. The way David had looked at me. The crack in his voice when he said not anymore. For the first time in years, I'd seen something in him that wasn't part of our carefully rehearsed routine. Vulnerability. Maybe even regret. But also fear. The same fear I had felt, that we had let our love become wallpaper. Familiar, comforting. But no longer noticed. The next morning, as sunlight spilled into the kitchen and the scent of fresh coffee filled the air, I felt different. Not resolved. But clearer. Like a fog had lifted just enough for me to see where I was standing. When I arrived at David's office around noon to drop off his lunch, something I hadn't done in a long time, I passed Ethan's office without meaning to stop. But then, as if pulled by some invisible force, I slowed. Through the glass panel, I saw him at his desk, eyes on his screen, brows furrowed in focus. The sunlight hit his profile just right, casting shadows that softened the lines of his face. And then, as if sensing me, he looked up. Our eyes met. Just a second. But it was enough. I gave him a small, subtle smile. One that said, "I see you." And then I kept walking. I didn't stop. I didn't go in. Because in that moment, I understood something that had taken weeks to surface. This was never about Ethan. It wasn't about the charge in the air, or the lingering glances, or the coffee-fueled confessions whispered in quiet corners. Ethan had merely lit the match. But the flame, that quiet flickering unrest, had already been inside me. It was about me. About the version of myself I had stopped noticing. The woman I had tucked away under titles like wife, mother, partner, caretaker. And now, after years of silence, she had stirred, asking to be seen again, not by someone else, but by me. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready. Ready to meet her again.